talking about the root causes of this. We are in a particularly in the West, but now I see it happening across the world, particularly in China and in India. You see unbridled consumption because now there's a rising middle class that, they deserve the chance to have material goods and they have the means to do it. But it's a pity, I think, that developing countries can't learn from our mistakes in the West, where we've just consumed our way into obesity, into diabetes, into landfills that are overflowing, into polluted lakes and rivers. And so consumption is what's driving that. And so I think it's very important for young people to really be taught by their families, their communities, to know the difference between want and need.
Hello, sir. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Mitti Ke.
So, how's the lockdown been going for you?
The lockdown has been actually amazing, a real adventure. I would say that tragically, we have lost a couple of friends, acquaintances, not real close friends, but it's made it very real for us because it's lives lost.
Right.
And New York, as you know, has been really heavily hit. But that all said, there's been an incredible sense of silver linings in all this. I love, for example, how people have sort of slowed down and Mother Nature has benefited from jets traveling and people just being more local. And then I think people also have been a little bit more present.
Right.
And so we've seen people sitting around dining room tables, cooking and eating together. We've had people actually read books and do things that life has not really afforded us of late. So lots of silver linings also from a business perspective. We'll talk about it today, but I've seen so many great pivots and brands who've tried to be part of a solution of COVID-19 versus purely shutting down. And most importantly, I have been very impressed at how globally the world, businesses, leaders, nonprofit organizations, within a matter of hours, if not days, they did the right thing, I think, in shutting down and suspending all operations, not knowing what the future held. That was astonishing to see that kind of synchronicity and such a uniform response to a global pandemic.
Right. So, sir, the questions I have today for you are basically circled around CSR.
Yes.
So, my first question to start the podcast would be, what is the role of CSR in the holistic upliftment of the society?
Well, CSR, corporate social responsibility, is, in my view, broadly the corporations, particularly publicly traded companies. It's their commitments to ESG, environment, social governance. And even more specifically, I think of CSR, when done well, is a brand's commitment to an ongoing and meaningful dialogue with its stakeholders, employees, shareholders, customers, over the purpose and the profit of the company. So I'll repeat that. I think it's a company's or a brand's long-term sustained commitment to a meaningful dialogue with its stakeholders around purpose and profit.
Okay. So, I would like to know, how has the CSR evolved over, say, the past 5 to 7 years, and where is it now, and what loopholes are yet to be addressed?
Mm-hmm. So the first part of your question, I would say over the past 5 years or so, CSR has really been established, right? We now have degree programs and associations and credentials and job descriptions, and it's really quite mainstream now. I would also say, though, that CSR's impact, its effectiveness, its quality is always going to get back to the individual, right? Each brand, each employee within a brand, that's where things either really make a difference, have an impact, or not. So in my book, The Caring Economy, I write about there being a spectrum of caring, because CSR is more like a muscle that one exercises than a point of arrival. And we're all on a spectrum of caring, and brands try to move, the ones I work with or try to work with, are the ones who have said, this is where we are on this issue, on this spectrum of caring. And we want to move further along to a more responsible, more caring, more responsible place, whether it's around women and girls' education, climate, social justice, as we're seeing now with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter here. So what's exciting right now, because of COVID, I think we really have more time to consider these things. And because the tragedy of George Floyd, and because of the rest that Mother Nature is getting with the planet, I think people are really starting to really understand not only the importance of CSR, but the importance that they have as individuals in affecting a brand's commitment or lack thereof. So that now the individual is forever in the driver's seat with brands, both not only as a consumer, but also as an employee or as an investor. The ESG, environment, social governance area of investing is the fastest growing. And it's because the big guys and gals know that good finance is working with brands that have a demonstrated track record and commitment to ESG. And the investors, the customers, the employees are all choosing those brands. So I think long term, it's been proven already to be a smart business move for brands to genuinely engage with this. But it's still going to get back to the actual individual brand, its executive team, and its employees on whether they really practice what they preach or not.
Okay, so second part of the question being, what are the loopholes that you say are yet to be addressed?
The loopholes for CSR now, where companies are not doing the right thing. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So there are plenty of loopholes. For example, you can be committed to an environmentally friendly policy as a company, but do you really hold yourselves accountable? Do you really measure? Do you really report on your environment, your carbon footprint? Are you making strides to reduce it? Right. So it's more of a journey than a point of arrival. But I would, sticking with that idea of loophole, I would say, for example, all the fashion brands, the luxury brands, they're all doing everything they can to green their supply chains, to be more carbon neutral in their productions, the fabrics they use, the dyes they use, the fair wages that they're paying their laborers. But what most of them are not doing, and I've written about this in Women's Wear Daily, the trade magazine or paper for the industry, they're not talking about unbridled consumption. They're not talking about the root causes of this. We are in particularly in the West, but now I see it happening across the world, particularly in China and in India. You see unbridled consumption because now there's a rising middle class that, they deserve the chance to have material goods and they have the means to do it. But it's a pity, I think, that developing countries can't learn from our mistakes in the West, where we've just consumed our way into obesity, into diabetes, into landfills that are overflowing, into polluted lakes and rivers. And so consumption is what's driving that. And so I think it's very important for young people to really be taught by their families, their communities, to know the difference between want and need, because that's at the crux of this consumption. And so I write in my book about, as an example, Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard, who founded it. They are famous for saying, don't buy this coat. Like, if you don't need it, don't buy it. And conversely, don't throw it away when you're done with it. Like, repair it. We can help you repair it, recycle it, or we'll buy it back and sell it to someone at a reduced price, gently used. So there's a loophole in the sense that fashion companies broadly have needed to do the right thing on climate and on environment, fair wages. But I think most of them are still trying to feed the beast of consumption. And that's a huge loophole.
Sir, like you mentioned about the recent tragedies which happened. So
Yes.
how would you reconcile CSR with the recent ones like COVID-19 or the murder of George Floyd?
Uh, so examples of where I've seen great CSR responses to George Floyd and to CSR. I would say with George Floyd, um, I'll give you one example, but there are many. I think it's been very exciting to watch Procter and Gamble at P&G, the ad campaign that they're running, certainly in the United States. I'm not sure if they're doing it globally. They are a global brand, as you know. But
Right.
they've been running a series of ads about social justice and race and skin color. And they are, and perhaps for your audience, you could even Google and get the link and share it, or I can help you find it. But they're very gritty. They're scripted words that talk about color, social justice, and Black Lives Matter in a way that is just raw and not what you would expect from the product of a packaged good company. There's as an example, one of them talks about something called the talk. And as a white American, I'm learning more and more about the talk, which is a very traditional conversation that a black parent has with his or her child, preteen or teenage, about how to behave when they encounter the police, because they will be treated completely differently. And of course, we're seeing that now. We're finally recognizing it. We haven't necessarily had our eyes open to it until George Floyd's murder, and then the subsequent ones before, and then all or after, and then those before. So this P&G ad has a series of conversations with the parent and the child about the talk. They're not selling shampoo. They're not selling hand cream. They're really selling this belief that Black Lives Matter, that we really have to, as a nation, deal with this. So that's quite bold. And I'm actually hoping to get the head of communications at P&G on my podcast, The Caring Economy, on Spotify, because what he's doing there is amazing. And then with COVID as an example, I think it's been, I've loved seeing particularly some of the Chinese companies who've responded. My husband works for JD.com, which is the third largest internet company in the world, traded on NASDAQ, $94 billion company, basically the Amazon of China. And during COVID-19, not only were they the lifeline of getting food and supplies into Wuhan to the first responders, but they were also doing that real time for 1.3 billion Chinese people who were now locked in their homes. So by doing their regular jobs, they were really being heroic. But then they went further, in particular by hiring a lot of people when brands were firing and terminating people because no one had work. So there was a great example. And then another Chinese example was Jack Ma at Alibaba did a
Right.
fantastic job of donating medical supplies into Africa. And I was just on a phone call with a friend from Kenya yesterday or 2 days ago, and she said that those kinds of gestures really helped in at least in Kenya. She didn't say for all of Africa, but at least for Kenya, it really helped with the response to COVID-19.
Right. So, sir, how expensive or complicated would you say is CSR to do well?
I think it's all up to the individual. I often say that money is the least creative solution to a problem. And if your first question is, can I afford it, or how much does it cost? I would encourage you to think of some other questions first, because what you really want is the commitment to the change, and
Right.
then worry about the rest. So in my book, The Caring Economy, I've written specifically about this and how to start it. And I always encourage clients and those interested in CSR to start small. And the most basic thing you can do, Mishika, is just start by inventorying what you're already doing as a brand. Because most brands already have some sort of employee volunteerism. Most brands still are doing some kind of local donations to charities or causes. And most brands have committed employees who, if you ask them, what should we as a brand do that will be an expression of our DNA? You're going to find out very quickly that you'll have a group of people who are very passionate about giving up extra time and energy to help a cause. And they will be building it with you so that it's really an expression of the DNA. And then it becomes a little bit more easy to build. Actually, it can be with no money at all.
So, sir, like you here gave a reference from your book, The Caring Economy. So, would you just give the listeners a bit of insight or a summary? What do you aim to get to the readers through your book?
Could you say one more time? What do I do to get readers to my book?
Sir, the question is like you gave us a reference of your book, The Caring Economy. So, can
Yes.
you give us an insight or a summary of the book? What, with what aim have you written the book?
Sure. I wrote the book for business people, and it's meant
Okay.
to be a handbook, basically, to help individuals that are doing CSR to do it better, or those who are thinking about doing it to try to go for it. And what I try to do with the book by giving examples of case studies, real time, good and bad examples of CSR being done, I try and help them save time and money by not reinventing the wheel. For
Okay.
example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right there you have an inventory of 17 of all the world's great challenges.
Yeah.
If a brand is thinking about what they want to get involved with, they should start with the SDGs. And not only will they see what are the main areas of engagement, but they'll also see which brands, governments, foundations are already doing work in that area. So they won't need to create a program from scratch. Rather, they could reach out to those who are already actively addressing poverty alleviation or climate or women and girls education and so forth, and then go into it that way. Similarly, I give a lot of tools and references of resources that are out there. Measurement is a very important part of successful CSR. As many have said before, including Mike Bloomberg, who I'm very fond of, and Jack Welch when he ran GE, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it.
Right.
So with CSR, you need to manage it by measuring it. So in my book, I talk about some of the more established global measurement tools like SASB, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, or GRI, so that my readers can know that they don't need to start a whole new measurement system, but they do need to measure, and that they can basically choose to measure and monitor what is meaningful to their brand. So again, with this idea of starting small, some of these inventories are quite robust, but in fact, as I've written in the book, one does not need to do all things in measurement, right? So at Christie's, when I built the CSR program there, which is called Art and Soul, we chose to measure and report on what was meaningful. So for us, those areas were climate around our water, waste, electric, carbon footprint, and then we carbon offset all of our corporate air travel. We also believed in philanthropy, so where we made charitable donations, or more importantly, worked with our clients to foster philanthropic or charitable auctions, we would report on that. We'd measure that and report on that. And then our employee engagement, our volunteerism, we tracked the hours supported, and then we showcased where we were having an impact on introducing young children in Hong Kong and London to museums and to culture. Disadvantaged students in New York. We work with dozens of not-for-profit cultural organizations to give them, basically through a sort of speed dating like jobs fair, we got our employees engaged with these charities. And then the last area we measured and reported on was called thought leadership. So Christie's is very involved in really heavy cultural issues like restitution of Nazi-looted art, or their policy around antique ivory, rhino and elephant ivory in artwork. So we were reporting on these kinds of thought leadership activities that we're taking. So the book is meant to give the reader examples of good and bad CSR, but also give you tools on measurement and give you tips on how to build your own sounding board so that when you go out into the world, you've got a set of advisors, informal advisors, who can help you real time go from strength to strength.
So, sir, like you mentioned about a couple of agendas or the CSR projects that the companies are working on. So, I want to know, what does a company consider, or what are the factors that a company takes into consideration before selecting a beneficiary or selecting what project they want to work on?
Well, it will depend on the brand and its leadership. It will depend often on the history or tradition of the brands. Forever it seemed JP Morgan Chase was sponsoring the Corporate Challenge, which is a fantastic global set of short distance races that are for charity. And the platform allows all kinds of businesses, large and small, to rally their employees around this cause. So it's a team building exercise. It's for charity. And that was a long-term commitment from JP Morgan Chase, I think for decades, actually. So that costs money, and that was one of their contributions, which I thought was really fantastic because they bank to or for all these big corporations, and they have a huge retail presence, and many of those racers, like myself, were customers of JP Morgan. For tech companies, for example, I think it's more germane that they do things around STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math, or what I like to call STEAM. I add the A in now because a lot of these tech companies are realizing they need more of the left and right brain, so they're recruiting STEAM educated people. And for example, healthcare industries, I did an interview yesterday with Sally Sussman, who's the head of external affairs for Pfizer, one of the largest pharmaceutical giants in the world, on the vanguard of finding a vaccine for COVID-19, as well as other great things. They have, as part of their give back to the community, they do this health fellows program where seasoned employees of Pfizer get to go out for a 6-month sabbatical and go into nonprofit organizations in healthcare and help them on skills development, on finances, whatever the organization needs. And that's charitable in the sense that they're paying their employee to be out of the office for 6 months doing highly important work, but just not their day job work. So that's very germane to a healthcare company that's concerned with global health.
So, what would your advice be to a person who's wanting to build a career in CSR?
First and foremost, find brands that resonate with you. Because if the brand doesn't resonate with you, you're not going to go the distance for it. And they probably are not going to go the distance with you. Beyond that, when you look at the brand, look at the leadership. Because you need, want, and should require that the leadership of any brand that you're going to associate your personal brand with, that it has the leadership that you respect and want to follow. Because CSR requires the full breadth of an institution's, company's employees, but it is most effective when it's genuinely engaged from the top down, right? So if the CEO talks the talk but doesn't really walk the walk, then their CSR is not going to be as great as one would hope. I guess the other way I would answer your question, Nishika, is I don't encourage people to go look for a CSR job because people like me who are sort of on the earlier wave of this profession all came in through indirect ways, right? I'm a corporate communications person. Some come into it through legal backgrounds. Some come through it through operations. The common denominator is that we've all been involved in basically being brand ambassadors and being engaged with our communities. So I would say find a brand with great leadership that you want to be a part of, whether it's TikTok or Google or JP Morgan Chase or Tata. I mean, Tata is a great Indian brand. They do phenomenal work around CSR. But pick any of the stable of brands within Tata and apply there, knowing that at the highest level, it is a responsible business that's trying to be even more responsible. And once you're in, you'll be able to be a part of that CSR activity. And if one day you're meant to be the head of CSR overall for a Tata, you will be. But I think it's more exciting at the start of the career to just get into a Tata or a JP Morgan or fill in the blank.
So, what was your initial point of inspiration or encouragement, I would say, to get into CSR? How did you land up in CSR?
Yes, it was, I say that life always makes sense in the rearview mirror, like when you're driving a car. So most of my professional career has been in corporate communications or public relations, public affairs. So I've always worked in these multinational settings like American Express and New York Times Company and Christie's, and a tech company called Razorfish. And in those jobs, typically you would have some element of community engagement or sustainability or foundation, philanthropy, public affairs, consumer affairs. And so I was always somewhat involved in these great causes, either running an awards program at American Express or setting up the CSR program or setting up the green auction at Christie's, which was a 3-year environmental charity auction that raised a lot of money and visibility for 4 environmental organizations. That kind of work was always in my wheelhouse. And then about 7 years into my career at Christie's, when I was running the corporate social responsibility, when I was running the corporate communications function, a new CEO came in and had seen what I'd done with the green auction and the rest of my career. And he said, we'd like to make a fuller commitment to corporate social responsibility, and we would like you to run it, build it and run it. So that was sort of the official start of my CSR career. And I've stayed with it. I really believe in the end goal. I do believe that CSR in general, in a utopian world, will go away because, in fact, every employee, I believe, should be responsible for the brand's integrity and its responsibility. But in the meanwhile, it's great that there are brands that are really making commitments, staffing and funding CSR.
So, what have you learned working in the CSR sector, and something you would like to share with the audience?
I would say a couple things. One, I call my book The Caring Economy because caring is the main point of all this. And that language is so sometimes politicized, off-putting, compromising, or just confusing. So call it sustainability, call it CSR, call it citizenship, call it greenwashing. The language is almost beside the point. My main message is to go back to what we learn as infants. We know when we are being cared for, and conversely, we know if we're caring for others as we grow up in life. And business leaders know this, employees know this, investors know this, customers know this. You know if you're being cared for by a brand or not. So I would say what's been reaffirmed for me over and over again about CSR is that it's a business essential, and it really should be evident to people. But if it's not, my book is a way to help them get there. The other thing I would say is that we all have the ability to be that change agent, no matter where we are in the food chain of our organizations. And particularly now with Black Lives Matter and climate change and the pandemic, I believe that leadership and brands are really genuinely listening more than ever to what the people have to say. And so now is that moment. Now is that time, particularly with technology like this that we're using today to be able to connect halfway around the world for a higher purpose. It's thrilling. I mean, what could be better than really getting the best minds and the best ideas connected toward a better tomorrow?
Absolutely. So, I have another question which I usually ask to a lot of guests who are associated with the CSR or work in the social sector. So, the 17 SDGs we have, which we have aimed to 2030. So, and we still face issues like racism or sexism or gender inequality. So, do you think it would be possible for the world collectively to reach the goal of the 17 SDGs till 2030?
I think it's absolutely possible. I think that for sure we are and can continue to move in the right direction on all SDGs. I think it's, again, like CSR is a muscle we need to practice. We need to keep these conversations going and keep our actions that support them going. And we need to inspire inspire, challenge, engage, find ways to catalyze others to be a part of the solution and come along. Shaming is not a good way to do it, but sometimes shaming works. But I do hope and believe, and I'm trying to make sure that this time around with George Floyd, with COVID-19, um, with climate, that I'm doing everything I can in my writing, in my speaking, and in my networks, my personal and professional networks, to say, what more can we do? I believe we all are going to have to hurt a little bit more and care a little bit more and work a little harder. But I do feel that there is a collective will now that's growing. The forces of nationalism are still very strong in your country and my country. There's a lot of there's a lot of negative energy out there in the world, but I feel strongly that the movement is growing in the right direction. And the best part of all of this, the CSR, the conversation we're having today, is I don't believe we have to be proven right, that we are on the right side of history. So even if, God forbid, I don't live to see the 2030 goals achieved, or some SDGs don't get as much attention, it's still, I know it's the right thing to do, and I'm doing all that I can, I believe, to make sure that they are achieved. And so I'm excited about it. I really think that we have a chance, and we're going for it.
Very glad to listen to that positive perspective of yours, and I hope we do make the change and by taking action at an individual level too. So, my the question to wrap up the podcast would be: what is the best advice you've ever got, say in personal life or in professional life, that if you have to pack it up in a 5 to 7 presentation title, what would that be?
It's one word. It's purpose. Find your purpose. It's not something that you just quickly throw out there. It takes an internal dialogue and exercise, and then when you have a statement of purpose for yourself, for your life, that really speaks from your core, then you start to talk to those you trust and know you well, like your parents, your brothers, sisters, and they will tell you, they'll laugh in your face and tell you how ridiculous you are, that it's so not you, or they will laugh in your face and say, oh my God, that is so you. But the purpose is the higher level thinking, right? Like, why am I uniquely qualified to be on this planet to do what I'm doing? So you talk to them, you write it down, you start to verbalize it and share it with more and more people until you own it. So for me, my purpose is making a difference through daily discovery and adventure. So this, for me, Mishka, is an adventure, right? I'm meeting you for the first time. I have great faith in what you're doing and what we're doing together. And just by virtue of my being here, I'm on mission with my purpose. And so great brands, great individuals have that higher purpose. And so I think that's a really critical conversation to have in life sooner rather than later. But you can do it at your age, or you can do it when you're 80 years old. Like, purpose
Right.
it's evident, it's there, and purpose matters.
Absolutely. So, sir, what do you think? What steps can we take at an individual level to foster dialogue about change?
Could you say that one more time?
What steps or what actions can we take at individual level to foster dialogues, say about change, or being the change, making the change?
Sure. Well, one thing is have a good look at your social media, because now social media is everywhere, right? But I think too often people are using it in a lazy or less than rigorous way, by which I mean it's entertainment versus purpose driven. So I, for example, will not use Facebook or WeChat because I'm sorry, Facebook or Instagram, because I'm very, very philosophically opposed to Mark Zuckerberg and what he has done with Facebook. And I think we're seeing now with boycotts from advertisers that until they start to really deal with the incendiary language on their site, they shouldn't be getting people's attention or support, advertising dollars, and what have you. So I think first we should look at how we communicate to the world. And is it entertainment or is it purpose driven? And then think about how we can take that which is entertainment and make it more purpose driven. So for example, me, my only social media really is LinkedIn. It's a professional network where I have 27,000 contacts and where I only opine about my book and purpose-driven brands and corporate social responsibility. And then I am on WeChat because I do a lot of work in China and with China. So, and all of that work is still related to my book and my message about being responsible in business. If I were a 17-year-old kid on TikTok, I would still want to have my activities there be purpose-driven. So it goes back to the original point about what is your purpose. And when you have that, it's really exciting because when you see someone such as yourself as a young professional, young student, when you see someone who's purpose-driven, you know that A, you either want to be on their team and working with them, or B, get out of their way because they are on fire and they are going places that you, for whatever reason, don't want to go. So, so that's how I would start the dialogue, is first looking at your social media and how you are using it, if it's entertainment, if it's purpose driven. And then I think it's practice, practice, practice. So 2 more ideas for your audience. One is to just start small with conversations, right? At a dinner table or at a social setting, we all have the opportunity, I would submit the responsibility, to have meaningful conversations versus witty banter or silliness. So we all can guide the conversation towards something that's meaningful and helpful and inclusive or not. And then the other tip I have, particularly for young professionals and rising young folks, students, is there's a great international public speaking organization which is called Toastmasters, and you may have heard of it. It's nominal, its fees are nominal. You go along at your own pace, but it's a series of 10 speeches that you give, from a shorter one to a longer one. And what it does, Mishika, is it allows you to practice your public speaking, but it also allows you to present ideas, personal issues, business opportunities, challenges that you want to vet with others and get very specific, concrete feedback. And it's a safe space in a sense, and it's all about public speaking, but speaking with purpose. And that's another way for folks to really practice purpose-driven dialogues.
Thank you so much, sir. I think this will be of great value to the listeners, especially the young population who's
Yes,
longing to make a change and working in the sector.
absolutely.